Hi everyone, this is Steve87th, and this is my entry into the freight car section of the Down and Dirty Weathering Contest number 3 held by JC's Rip Track. This video is going to show you what I started with, what I'm trying to accomplish, and how I go through the steps of doing that. I'm fairly new to weathering, so I've taken advantage of some of the products that are out there, such as the AK Interactive items, and that's what I'll be using extensively through this. So let's go ahead and get started. And again, this is my entry into the Down and Dirty Weathering Contest number 3. Thanks for watching. All right, so here's what I'm starting with. These are basic maintenance of way ballast cars that I have already kind of taken apart because the wheel sets that were brought along, there was actually only 5 attached. The other thing that I did was they had horn hook couplers on here, which those will all be replaced by regular Katy couplers. Okay, so these wheel sets are going to be replaced by the tangent wheel sets that you see here, as well as one pair of Atlas. So only one of these cars can be entered. And the journey begins on the competition. These are a picture of 2 of the Puget Sound and Pacific maintenance of way cars that they use for ballast. You can see that everything has been taken off of them with the exception of the words maintenance of way. All of the decals are gone that would be there. These are the best pictures that I could get. These cars are normally in the yard, so I can't get to them. So you can see I'm not replicating these cars. I'm using these as the reference for what I want my cars to look like. I don't have exact replicas. So you can see that there's large amounts of rust deposits. There's actually some large areas of rust being gone and an overall disarray of the cars. So this is what I am going to try to imitate on the cars that I will be doing. Okay, step 1 is to clean everything. So I normally use my ultrasonic cleaner with a little bit of Dawn soap in it, and this is a hot cleaner, so it actually heats up the water as well for about 400 seconds. Then I remove everything and let it dry. All right, so for this project, I'm going to use the Vallejo Paints Rust and Chipping Effects kit. And there's some other things that I'll be using during this thing will be a wireless airbrush, some different types of tape that I'm going to be using. My regular airbrush is also one of the items that I have. And you can see here that I've got my paint booth staged and taped up and all ready to be used. Okay, so step 1 in the kit is to use a red-brown primer for the entire model. Now, I did not strip these models prior to painting. Part of that is because some of the effect is the fact that the car itself was an older car that was bought by somebody. So if some of the lettering came through from previous, I thought that it would really be good. So you can see I'm using the wireless airbrush here that I got not too long ago, and it works pretty good. It's a little bit lower pressure, but it was able to do all of what I wanted to do. So you can see here, the first thing that I did was prime the entire outside of one of the cars, and just to demo it without having to do it too much, I went ahead and show you guys how to primer the inside of the car too, because I'm doing both weathering types. So the first thing again to do is to put the primer all over the car. I also needed to do priming on the wheel sets. So here I am taping up the flanges of the wheels prior to painting. So moving on to step 2 of the process, I used the camouflage black brown. So this is a darker brown color, and I used it wherever I had anything that I wanted to highlight. In this case, it was mostly all of the ribs and all along the creases inside of the hopper car. Plus, I also did it on the tops and the bottom rails. So that was where I wanted my highlights to be. So that's what that was done for. Okay, so next we go to step 3, which is just applying a rust color. This is meant to be put on in a random fashion in different areas. This is kind of where I had to look a little bit, where I wanted to see some of the deeper rust and all. So there was different areas that I kind of concentrated on with this one. It's kind of hard to see where I do this, but it comes out later in the video. Also used this paint on the wheel sets after I had just done the initial prime. I didn't do step 2, I only did step 1 and 3 on the wheels. All right, so here I skip over steps 4 and 5, which are meant for high temperature areas, and go right to step 6, which is applying the yellow ochre, which I do with a sponge to get random dots. The yellow ochre is one of the lightest colors that I'm going to be using. So you can see here that I just, with the sponge, because it leaves holes all over the place, I put dots all over the car. Okay, so here I jump to step 7, where I actually start applying the chipping compound. Now, this is kind of up for debate whether you put the chipping compound where you want the stuff to stay or if you paint the whole model. In this case, I painted the whole model to see how some of the results came out. And then I let the chipping compound dry completely. So after about 2 to 4 hours, the chipping compound is finished. Now I'm going to actually repaint the car itself. So the first thing that I'm doing is the outside of the car. With the outside of the car, I am using the Vallejo light gray paint. Yes, this looks like the color that we started with on the car. There is a couple of different ways that you could have done this. I chose to repaint the cars and do the chipping compound. So all of the external surfaces were painted with the light gray color. You can see here I did upside and downside and all that kind of stuff. All right, so the next step that I do after I've painted the outsides is I paint the insides. The insides of the hopper are painted with the Vallejo light steel to give it exactly what it would look like inside the hopper. Now, it was a little bit dark in there, so I used a flashlight to show me the spots that I missed. And then I decided I should go ahead and do that to touch up the outside area. The nice thing about using an airbrush is I have enough control that I don't have to tape any of the areas off because they're so large and very well defined. Now we move to step 10 to remove the paint from the chipping compound. All right, so I have various scratching tools such as toothbrushes, eyeliner brushes, hard stipple brushes, and even some toothpicks to do some scratching on the surfaces to get rid of the paint. So to do this, what you need to do is put lots of water on the area. Once you let the water soak in for a little while, that actually softens up where the paint is. And now you can go in there and start doing the scratching. This is not an easy process. You can see here that I use various items and various types of things to start scratching this paint off. Now what we're doing is exposing the lower levels of the model. I move around the model and I let the water soak in each time. And then when I go back, I start, scratching at it more. And I also try to keep my tools wet. As you keep the tools wet, it puts a little bit more water in there and you can scratch it up some more. So I get the bottom layer done and then I move to the other side. Repeating this over and over again until I get enough pulled off that I think is right. And if it's too much, I can go back and fix it if I want to, which I have to later. One of the things that have happened in here was that, which is a step that I missed. I should have, prior to adding the final coat of paint, the gray color of paint, I should have gone ahead and put in a matte finish over the rusting areas to keep the rust from breaking down. What happened with me was I actually broke through to the original paint job underneath the primer, which there was a warning that something like that could happen. So now I'm doing the inside. The inside was the same way. You just get in there, you scratch, you claw, you do whatever you do to scratch up and expose that rust area. So after doing a long time of doing all of the chipping and scratching, I want to show you all 3 car results. You can see here that there's various different things. You can see I also went all the way down to the new colors. There's a big white spot there. There's more colors that are coming off. But this is how I got it all chipped off on all of the cars. And they all varied in different ways, which was kind of neat. Some of them a lot harder than the other ones. So I was going to go back and retouch these as it was. Now that they're all done, I actually take the sponge and the light gray paint to go back over some of the areas that I didn't like to cover back up with the paint. I found the sponge was a little bit better because it wouldn't cover everything up and it would still give me a variation with the colors. So rather than putting it on with a brush or even having a fine brush. So I liked doing the little sponge. So next I went ahead and finished off painting some of the other items that needed to be painted gray, and then we moved on. Okay, so next is to put the matte finish on. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough pressure from that handheld gun to use it. So I had to do a quick thing because everything was drying and use the Tester's spray lacquer matte. I put the matte coat on there to seal everything in and not to disturb all the work that I was doing. I also went with the matte because I have to go in and do some more painting. So I wasn't quite ready to do the finish. So I made sure that everything got a nice good coat and that it was allowed to dry for quite a while to make sure that that finish was all taken care of. So here's the results of the chipping out of the car. You can see that we've got lots of it. We also did the inside, taking off some of the silver. Both sides, I had to do some touch-up paints on there for some of the areas that were stripped out a little bit too much, but we'll cover that up. You can see the insides were done, and we also did the wheelbases and other parts that go back to the train. Okay, so now we start the assembly process of the cars. First thing I had to do is make the wheel sets and put the wheel sets together, right? I had to clean them all up, take the tape off the wheels, and then put the wheels together. Once that was done, I was able to actually assemble the car. At this point, I wanted the whole car assembled so that I could get a more uniform look when it came to the rest of the weathering. Okay, so my first step was to apply Vallejo Model Wash for gray vehicles, just to give it an overall color underneath everything that was kind of dark to highlight some of the areas. So now I start actually applying rust to the cars. The first thing I use is Panzer's Ace's Light Rust from Vallejo. I do that in many of the areas all over the car. Once I finish with that, then I come across with the Vallejo Light Rust Wash from Mecca. This I actually put on all over the car to give it kind of a rust look all over, and then come back and take some of that actual off of the car. Now that I've got a good feel for what the car kind of looks like, I come up and I start putting on the areas of paint where the decals are going to be applied. I just used Vallejo Gloss Black to apply this to. I wanted to do it at this step because now I'm going to apply decals, so I need to put on another varnish. So with the cars mostly looking the way that I want to, I come up and I put the gloss coat of Vallejo Gloss on here. I basically do it all over the car to make sure that it's all sealed in so that I have a nice glossy finish to put the decals on. Plus it seals in all of the work that I've done so far and gives me a good working surface for my next steps. Okay, so now I'm ready to apply the decals. I use microscale lettering for the simple decals that are on there, which is actually, there's just maintenance of way. There's no tag numbers, no weights or anything like that. So I had to cut out individual items. So I let them, as normal. I put some microsol on there, let the decals soak, put the decals on, align them, and then go ahead and finish them off with microset. So that's the decal process. So I use Jelly Roll pens from Sakura, Japan. They are the original gel pens that were invented in the 1980s. So it gives a paint-like appearance when you're using them. What's nice about these pens, they also come with various tip widths. So you can be very, very accurate when you're doing your actual graffiti. And it also gives a paint-like finish. All right, my final thing is to actually put ballast into the cars and then dump it out, because this would tell you kind of where the ballast would lay when the cars are finished and when they're empty. After I put the ballast in there, I then went over the entire car again with a matte finish to lock everything in place so that we could finish off the cars and make them look more realistic. And here's my comparison of what I've done so far with the photo. So I'm noticing that this car needs to be a lot more red. So I'm going to do some pan pastels to try to make it a little bit closer to the picture. You can see here that I've already added the decals on the maintenance away on the side and at the ends. So now we just need to get these colors a little bit brighter red, and let's start with that process. So using makeup brushes, I use Pan Pastel Titanium White, the black, the red iron oxide shade, and the burnt sienna. Okay, so the first thing I do is I put a little bit of white on it just to kind of dull everything down. I put a lot more white on the wheels, and then I come back over that with some of the black, and I highlight some of the areas with the black. Then you see I start using the red oxide shade all over the car itself. I put that on kind of heavy at first, but then come back and take a lot more of it off. Once that's done, I come back with the red iron oxide and then brush that into different various places. I like using the makeup brushes because they're meant to put on powders and things like that, so it makes it a lot easier. Once all this is done to my satisfaction, we once again coat the entire thing with a matte dull coat to finish it off. And that concludes how I've done the weathering for these cars all the way through to the end. And here are the two cars outside in the sun so you can see what they look like in daylight. One side, and then we flip the cars around to see the other side. The car that I'll be entering is Maintenance of Way 22. So here again is the pictures of the Maintenance of Way cars, and then this is my rendition of car 22 from the Puget Sound and Pacific Rail. We start by panning both sides of the car, and then we go to the B end, and then we go over to the A end, and then we're going to give you a couple of close-ups of both sides, half of the car and then half of the car, for a little bit better view of the entire process that has been completed and done. So this is my entry for the Down and Dirty Weathering Contest. So this is Steve87th saying thanks for watching this video for my Down and Dirty Weathering Contest number 3 entry. Please like this video, subscribe, and go on over to Midwest Model Railroader and vote for my entry into the Down and Dirty Weathering Contest. Everybody, thank you for watching.